The breaking point, the fluorescent lights of Metropolitan General Hospital's prenatal wing hummed with their usual clinical persistence, casting everything in harsh white relief. Victoria Manning shifted uncomfortably in the examination chair, her 7-month belly making even simple movements a calculated effort. The baby had been restless all morning, as if sensing the tension that had become their constant companion. Dr. Rachel Torres moved with practiced efficiency around the small room, checking monitors and making notes on her tablet. At 42, she delivered hundreds of babies and witnessed every possible family dynamic. But something about today's appointment felt different. The expectant mother's husband sat rigidly in the corner chair, his expensive suit perfectly pressed, his jaw clenched in a way that suggested barely contained frustration. "Everything looks good with the baby," Dr. Torres announced, her warm smile directed at Victoria.
"Race
"Is strong. Growth is on track. How have you been feeling?" Victoria glanced nervously at Derek before answering. "Tired, but okay." "Oh, difficulty sleeping. That's completely normal at this stage." The doctor made another note. "Any particular stressors we should discuss?" Sleep disturbances can often be related to anxiety. Derek's phone buzzed insistently. He answered it without leaving the room, his voice sharp and demanding as he discussed what sounded like a failing business deal. Victoria's shoulders tensed further with each harsh word he spoke. "I'm sorry," Dr. Torres said quietly to Victoria, "but I need to ask your husband to step outside during the examination." "Hospital policy requires I'm not going anywhere," Derek snapped, ending his call abruptly. "This is my wife, my child. I have every right to be here." "Of course you do." The doctor replied calmly, "But I need to speak with Victoria privately about some routine matters. It'll just take a few minutes." Derek's face darkened. He stood slowly, his 6-foot frame suddenly seeming to fill the small room with menacing energy. "What kind of routine matters require privacy from a husband?" Victoria's breathing became shallow. She recognized that tone, that dangerous shift in Derek's demeanor that preceded his worst moments. "Derek, please. It's just standard procedure. Don't tell me what's standard."
"Oh."
His voice rose sharply. "I'm tired of being treated like I'm some kind of threat. I built a multi-million-dollar company from nothing. I deserve respect." Miguel Santos, the security guard making his rounds, paused outside the door. 20 years of hospital security had taught him to recognize the sound of escalating domestic tension. He radioed quietly for backup while positioning himself strategically. In the hallway, Dr. Torres stepped between Derek and Victoria, her medical training overriding any personal fear. "Mr. Manning, I need you to lower your voice. You're in a medical facility, and there are other patients. Don't you dare lecture me about appropriate behavior." Derek snarled, taking a step closer to the doctor. "My wife has been filling your head with lies about me, hasn't she? She's trying to make me look like some kind of monster." Victoria pressed herself back against the examination table, tears beginning to stream down her face. "Derek, I haven't said anything, please. Just calm down. Calm down." His laugh was bitter and frightening. "My business is falling apart. My wife is conspiring against me with strangers, and you want me to calm down?" The moment stretched taut. Like a wire about to snap, Dr. Torres reached slowly for the emergency button, but Derek saw the movement. In an instant, his carefully maintained facade crumbled completely. His hand shot out, not toward the doctor, but toward Victoria. Vicious backhand that connected with her cheek with a sound that seemed to echo through the suddenly silent corridor. Victoria cried out, instinctively curling forward to protect her unborn child. Dr. Torres immediately moved to shield her patient while Miguel Santos burst through the door, his hand already on his radio calling for immediate assistance. "Sir, you need to step back now," Miguel commanded, his voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through his system. Derek looked around the room as if suddenly awakening from a trance, seeing the horrified faces staring back at him. For just a moment, something like regret flickered across his features. Then his expression hardened again, the mask of entitlement sliding back into place. "This is a private family matter," he said coldly, straightening his tie. My wife is emotional due to her condition.
Oh.
I was simply trying to help her focus, but the damage was done. In that single moment of violence, Derek Manning had shattered more than just his wife's sense of safety. He'd unknowingly triggered a chain of events that would ultimately destroy everything he'd worked to build. Because Victoria Manning wasn't just any victim, she was the beloved daughter of Harrison Blackwell. Was one of the most powerful men in the country, and Harrison Blackwell was about to discover exactly what had happened to his little girl. The father's awakening. The 42nd floor of Blackwell Industries Tower offered a commanding view of Manhattan's financial district. But Harrison Blackwell wasn't admiring the scenery. 61, the steel-haired billionaire had built his empire through calculated precision and unwavering focus. This Tuesday morning found him reviewing quarterly reports when his private line rang. The number only 5 people in the world possessed. Mr. Blackwell? The voice was hesitant, apologetic. This is Miguel Santos, security at Metropolitan General Hospital. I have your daughter here, sir. There's been an incident. Harrison's blood turned to ice. He'd given Miguel his card 2 years ago when Victoria had been hospitalized for appendicitis, with strict instructions to call if she ever needed anything. The fact that Miguel was using it now meant something was terribly wrong. A kinda incident? Harrison's voice remained steady, but his knuckles whitened as he gripped the phone. Double quotes, sir. Your son-in-law.
Oh.
He struck Mrs. Manning during a medical appointment. She's safe now, but shaken. The baby appears unharmed, but the doctors want to monitor her. The words hit Harrison like physical blows. For a moment, the most powerful CEO in the country couldn't speak. His mind flashed to Victoria as a child, dancing in his office while he worked late, her laughter filling the sterile corporate environment with joy. Then he thought of Derek Manning, the charming entrepreneur who'd swept his daughter off her feet 3 years ago, who'd seemed so devoted, so worthy of her love. Where's Derek now? Harrison's voice carried a dangerous quiet that made his assistant James Rivera look up from across the room with concern. Security escorted him out, sir. He left without much resistance once he realized people were watching. But Mr. Blackwell, this didn't look like a first-time thing, if you understand my meaning. Harrison understood perfectly. He'd built his fortune by reading people, by seeing patterns others missed. The signs had been there, Victoria's increasing withdrawal from family gatherings, her nervous laughter when Derek made cutting remarks disguised as jokes, the way she'd started making excuses to avoid social events. Miguel, I need you to ensure my daughter doesn't leave that hospital alone. Not with him, not with anyone, except people I send personally. Can you do that? Absolutely, sir. I've got her in a private room with Dr. Torres. Hospital administration is being very cooperative. Harrison ended the call and immediately pressed his intercom. James, cancel everything. Get Patricia Chen on the phone immediately. Then book me on the next flight to wherever Metropolitan General Hospital is located. James had worked for Harrison for 8 years and had never seen his boss's composure crack. Sir, is everything my daughter is in danger? The words came out clipped, final. Patricia first, then Marcus Cole. Tell them both it's priority alpha. Within minutes, Patricia Chen's voice filled the office through the speakerphone. As Blackwell Industries head of legal affairs, she'd handled everything from hostile takeovers to international contracts, but she'd never heard this particular tone from her employer. Patricia, I need you to drop everything and compile a complete financial profile on Derek Manning and Manning Development Corporation. Every contract, every loan, every business relationship. I want to know who he owes money to, who owns pieces of his company, and most importantly, where he's vulnerable. Harrison, what's happened? Patricia's voice carried genuine concern. She'd watched Victoria grow up, had attended her wedding to Derek with unvoiced reservations about the groom's character. He put his hands on Victoria. She's pregnant, Patricia. 7 months pregnant with my grandchild, and that bastard hit her in front of medical staff. The silence on the other end stretched for several seconds. When Patricia spoke again, Her voice carried the cold fury of a woman who'd clawed her way to the top of corporate law through sheer determination. I'll have preliminary findings within 6 hours. A complete analysis by tomorrow morning. Harrison, we're going to destroy him, aren't we? Completely. Harrison's voice carried absolute certainty. But legally, Patricia. I want him ruined through the courts, through proper channels. I won't give him any ammunition to use against Victoria in custody proceedings. James appeared in the doorway, gesturing urgently. Marcus Cole is online too, and your jet will be ready in 90 minutes. Harrison picked up the second line. Marcus Cole had been his private investigator for over a decade, a former FBI agent whose discretion was matched only by his effectiveness. Marcus, I need you to dig into Derek Manning's personal life. I want to know about affairs, gambling, drug use, violence, anything that paints a picture of an unfit father and dangerous husband. In Marcus. Time is not a luxury we have. Understood. Should I coordinate with Patricia on the financial angle? Yes, but keep your investigations. Separate until we have a complete picture. I don't want any overlap that could compromise either approach. As Harrison gathered his things for the flight, James handed him a tablet with Derek Manning's public information already loaded. Photos from charity galas showed a handsome couple, Derek's arm possessively around Victoria's waist, his smile never quite reaching his eyes. Sir, James said quietly, what do you want me to tell the board about today's meetings? Harrison paused at his office door. Looking back at the empire he'd built through decades of careful planning and strategic thinking, none of it mattered now. The only thing that mattered was the terrified young woman lying in a hospital bed, carrying his grandchild and finally understanding that her fairy tale marriage had become a nightmare. Tell them, Harrison said, his voice carrying the weight of absolute resolve, that Harrison Blackwell is going to war. The elevator doors closed, and Manhattan's most powerful man descended toward a battle. It would either save his daughter or destroy everything he'd built trying. Sanctuary and secrets, the Blackwell estate stretched across 200 acres of pristine countryside. 90 minutes north of Manhattan, a Georgian mansion that had housed for generations of the family, Victoria stood at the French doors of the East Wing's master suite, watching autumn leaves drift across manicured lawns that seemed to extend forever. 3 days had passed since her father had swept her away from the hospital in his private jet, and she still felt like she was living. In someone else's life, the baby's heart rate is perfect, Dr. Amanda Foster announced, packing away her portable monitoring equipment. Harrison had flown in the respected obstetrician from Johns Hopkins specifically to care for Victoria, ensuring she received the best medical attention without risking public exposure. How are you feeling emotionally? Victoria touched her healing cheek, where the bruise had faded to a yellowish shadow. Safe, confused, guilty. She turned from the window. Is it normal to miss someone who hurt you? Dr. Foster, a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and gentle hands, sat down in the antique chair beside Victoria's bed. Trauma bonding is incredibly common in abusive relationships. Your mind is trying to reconcile the man who brought you flowers with the man who struck you. That internal conflict isn't weakness, it's human. A soft knock interrupted them. Alina. Vasquez, the estate's head housekeeper who'd been with the family for 15 years, entered with a tea service. Her maternal presence had been a source of comfort since Victoria's arrival, preparing favorite childhood foods and maintaining a soothing atmosphere throughout the house. Senorita Victoria, your father asks if you're feeling up to joining him for lunch on the terrace. Says it's important, but only if you're ready. Victoria nodded, grateful for her father's patience. Since bringing her home, Harrison had given her space to process while quietly orchestrating something in the background. She'd heard fragments of phone conversations, seen Thomas Wright, the family lawyer, arriving for hushed meetings in the library. Something significant was building, and she knew it involved Derek. 30 minutes later, Victoria found her father on the stone terrace overlooking the estate's lake. Thomas Wright sat across from him, manila folders spread across the Roderin table like battle plans. Harrison rose immediately when he saw his daughter, pulling out her chair with the same gentle courtesy he'd shown her mother during their 30-year marriage. You look better, he said, meaning it. Color had returned to Victoria's face, and the haunted expression was beginning to fade. "I feel stronger. Dr. Foster says the baby is thriving." Victoria accepted a cup of Elena's chamomile tea, inhaling the soothing aroma. "What did you want to discuss?" Thomas Wright, a distinguished man in his 60s who'd handled Blackwell family affairs for decades, cleared his throat diplomatically. "Victoria, we've been investigating Derek's business activities and personal conduct. What we've discovered is ... extensive." Harrison leaned forward, his expression carefully controlled. "Before we share what we've found, I need to know, do you want to try to save your marriage? Is there any part of you that believes Derek can change?" The question hung in the autumn air. Victoria watched a pair of swans glide across the lakes. Mirror surface, their movement elegant and unhurried. A month ago, she might have said yes, might have clung to hope that the Derek who'd courted her so passionately could emerge again. But something had shifted fundamentally when his hand struck her face. "No," she said quietly. "I can't raise my daughter in fear. I won't have her grow up thinking that love looks like walking on eggshells." Harrison's shoulders relaxed almost. Imperceptibly, Thomas opened the first folder. "Derek's company's hemorrhaging money," the lawyer began. "He's leveraged everything: his office building, his equipment, even his personal assets. He owes approximately $12 million to various creditors, including some rather unsavory private lenders." Victoria's eyes widened. $12 million. "But he always said business was excellent. He's been moving money between accounts to hide the losses," Thomas continued. "Our forensic accountants found evidence of potential fraud invoicing for work never completed, inflated project costs, misrepresentation to investors." Harrison placed a protective hand over his daughters. "There's more. Marcus Cole found evidence of previous incidents. Former secretary filed a complaint 2 years ago about Derek's temper, then mysteriously withdrew it after receiving a substantial settlement." The revelation hit Victoria like a physical blow. She'd thought she was Derek's first victim, that somehow she'd driven him to violence. Learning that she was part of a pattern was both devastating and oddly liberating. "What about the gambling?" Thomas asked, consulting another folder. "Gambling?" Victoria's voice was barely a whisper. Harrison's jaw tightened. "High-stakes poker games, sports betting, casino visits to Atlantic City nearly every weekend for the past year. We estimate he's lost close to $3 million gambling, which explains the business problems." Dr. Foster, who'd been quietly observing from nearby, approached the table. "Victoria, I think that's enough information for today." "You're processing a lot of trauma." But Victoria shook her head. "I need to know everything. I need to understand what I was really married to." Thomas hesitated, then opened the final folder. "There are photographs, Victoria. Derek with other women, multiple affairs over the past 18 months. The swans on the lake had disappeared, leaving only ripples on the water's surface." Victoria felt something inside her break cleanly, like a bone that had been weakening for months, finally snapping under pressure. But instead of pain, she felt an unexpected relief. "So nothing was real," she said, more to herself than to the others. The loving husband, the successful businessman, the devoted father, to be all of it was lies. Harrison reached across the table and took both of her hands. "His lies don't diminish your truth, sweetheart. Your capacity for love, your trust, your hope for your marriage, those were real. You're not the one who broke your vows." Lena appeared with lunch, Victoria's favorite gazpacho and fresh bread. As they ate, Thomas outlined the legal strategy they were preparing. Divorce proceedings based on adultery and domestic violence, restraining orders, custody arrangements that would protect the baby, and civil suits to recover any marital assets Derek had gambled away. "What will happen to him?" Victoria asked. "Prison." "Most likely," Thomas replied matter-of-factly. "Duh. The fraud charges alone could result in 5 to 10 years. Combined with the domestic violence charges and potential racketeering if we can prove he borrowed money from organized crime figures. ... Victoria nodded slowly. A year ago, the thought of Derek in prison would have horrified her. Now she felt only a quiet satisfaction that he would face consequences for his actions. As afternoon shadows lengthened across the terrace, Dr. Foster suggested Victoria rest. The emotional revelations had been exhausting, even liberating ones. But as Victoria rose to leave, she turned back to her father. "Thank you," she said simply, "for saving us." Harrison stood and embraced his daughter carefully, mindful of her pregnancy. "You saved yourself, sweetheart. I just provided a safe place to land." As Victoria returned to her room for a nap, Harrison and Thomas remained on the terrace watching. The sun set over the lake. Tomorrow, they would begin the systematic destruction of Derek Manning's life. But tonight, Harrison's daughter and grandchild were safe, and that was all that mattered. The reckoning begins. Derek Manning's corner office on the 38th floor had once been his sanctuary, a shrine to his success with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Hudson River. Now it felt like a trap. For 5 days, he'd been calling Victoria's phone with no response. The Blackwell estate was impenetrable, protected by security that made his own bodyguards look like mall cops. "The Koreans pulled out this morning," Frank Morrison announced as he burst through the office doors. Derek's business partner and college roommate looked haggard, his usually perfect appearance disheveled from sleepless nights. That's $18 million in funding gone. They cited reputational concerns about recent incidents. Derek hurled his crystal paperweight against the wall, watching it shatter like his carefully constructed empire. Reputational concerns? Some. Old bastard whispers in a few ears, and suddenly I'm a pariah. Frank loosened his tie, a nervous habit Derek had noticed increasing over the past week. "It's not just whispers anymore, Derek. Harrison Blackwell is systematically destroying us. Our line of credit was frozen yesterday. The Meridian Project investors are demanding immediate repayment, and this morning..." Frank hesitated, pulling out his phone. Channel 7 ran a story. The news segment played on Frank's screen with devastating efficiency. Reporter Grace Hamilton, known for her investigative work on white-collar crime, delivered the story with professional detachment. Sources close to the investigation reveal that Manning Development Corporation is under federal scrutiny for potential fraud and money laundering. The company's CEO, Derek Manning, recently made headlines when he was escorted from Metropolitan General Hospital following an alleged domestic violence incident involving his pregnant wife. Derek watched his professional photograph flash across the screen alongside unflattering surveillance footage of him leaving the casino in Atlantic City. The narrative was already written: sexual businessman revealed as fraudulent abuser. "How did they get that casino footage?" Derek demanded. "Private investigator? Probably." "Derek, we need to talk about your options here. The FBI called this morning. They want to interview both of us about the Henderson Project invoicing." Before Derek could respond, his secretary's voice crackled through the intercom. "Mr. Manning? There are federal agents here to see you." Detective Caroline Nash entered with 2 FBI agents and a briefcase full of warrants. At 45, she'd built her reputation on domestic violence cases. And something about Derek Manning's arrogant demeanor triggered every instinct she'd developed over 20 years of police work. "Derek Manning, you're under arrest for aggravated assault, wire fraud, and money laundering," Detective Nash announced, her voice carrying the satisfaction of finally cornering a predator. "You have the right to remain silent, ... As the handcuffs clicked into place, Derek's mind raced through possible escape routes. His lawyer, his connections, his charm. Surely something could salvage this situation. But as they led him through his office building's lobby, past employees and clients who averted their eyes, he began to understand the scope of Harrison Blackwell's campaign. The courthouse hearing 2 days later was a masterclass in legal warfare. Judge William Sterling, a no-sense jurist with 30 years on the bench, reviewed the charges with growing disapproval. Thomas Wright sat in the gallery, taking notes for the civil proceedings to follow. "Your Honor," Derek's attorney, a nervous young man from a mid-tier firm, attempted to argue for bail reduction. "My client is a respected businessman with deep community ties. The domestic violence charge stems from a single incident during a stressful medical appointment. A single incident." Judge Sterling's voice cut through the courtroom like a blade. "Counselor, have you reviewed the evidence presented by the prosecution?" Detective Nash had done her homework. Phone records showed Derek's pattern of increasingly threatening calls to Victoria over the past 6 months. Security footage from their apartment building revealed late-night arguments in the parking garage. Medical records obtained through careful legal channels documented Victoria's previous accidents: a sprained wrist, bruised ribs, a concussion she'd claimed resulted from falling downstairs. Furthermore, the prosecutor continued, the defendant poses a significant flight risk. Financial records show he's moved substantial assets offshore in the past week, apparently in an attempt to hide funds from creditors and potential civil judgments. From the gallery, Grace Hamilton scribbled notes furiously. Her follow-up story would run that evening, complete with interviews from former employees who'd witnessed Derek's explosive temper and creditors who'd discovered fraudulent documentation. Judge Sterling set bail at $5 million with electronic monitoring, effectively ensuring Derek would remain in custody. As court officers led him away, Derek caught sight of Thomas right in the gallery. The elderly lawyer's expression one of quiet satisfaction. The ripple effects accelerated exponentially. By week's end, Manning Development Corporation had filed for bankruptcy protection. State Attorney General announced a comprehensive investigation into Derek's business practices. Former clients began filing civil suits for shoddy construction work and cost overruns. But the most devastating blow came from an unexpected source. Maria Santos, Derek's former secretary who'd signed the mysterious settlement agreement 2 years earlier, contacted Detective Nash through her new attorney. Harrison Blackwell's investigators had found her, convinced her that speaking up would protect other women, and provided legal support to break her silence. He cornered me in the supply room, Maria testified in a sworn deposition that would become evidence in multiple proceedings. When I tried to leave, he grabbed my arm so hard it left bruises. He said no one would believe me over him, that he could ruin my career with a phone call. Her testimony opened floodgates. 2 other former employees came forward with similar stories. Contractor revealed Derek's practice of billing for materials never delivered. An accountant admitted to helping manipulate financial statements. Under Derek's threats, the man who'd built his identity on control and intimidation discovered what happened when someone with greater resources decided to dismantle that carefully constructed facade. Every lie he'd told, every corner he'd cut, every person he'd bullied or cheated became ammunition in Harrison Blackwell's methodical destruction of his life. In his cell at the Metropolitan Detention Center, Derek stared at the concrete ceiling and finally understood what he was facing. This wasn't just about a moment of lost temper in a hospital room. This was about a father protecting his daughter from a predator, using every tool at his disposal to ensure that predator could never hurt anyone again. The guards informed him that his wife had filed for divorce, citing adultery, domestic violence, and irreconcilable differences. She was seeking sole custody of their unborn child, permanent restraining orders, and half of any remaining legitimate assets. Derek closed his eyes and realized that in striking Victoria, he hadn't just lost his temper, he'd signed his own death warrant. Harrison Blackwell was simply the executioner, carrying out a sentence Derek had written himself through years of cruelty, fraud, and violence. The reckoning had only just begun. New beginnings. The private maternity ward at Lenox Hill Hospital was a world away from the sterile corridors where Victoria's nightmare had begun 6 months earlier. Soft lighting replaced harsh fluorescence, and original artwork adorned walls, painted in soothing earth tones. At 3:47 a.m. on a crisp December morning, Victoria Grace Manning, soon to be Blackwell again, brought her daughter into the world with her father holding her hand and Dr. Amanda Foster guiding her through each contraction. "She's perfect," Dr. Foster announced as the baby's healthy cries filled the delivery room. 8 pounds, 2 ounces of pure determination. Victoria wept as they placed her daughter on her chest, overwhelmed by the surge of protective love that made every sacrifice worthwhile. The baby had her grandmother Christina's delicate features and her grandfather's determined chin. After months of fear and uncertainty, holding her healthy daughter felt like the first sunrise after an endless night. "Hello, Hope," Victoria whispered against the baby's downy head. "You're safe now. We're both safe." Harrison stood beside the bed, tears streaming down his face as he met his granddaughter for the first time. At 62, he'd conquered corporate boardrooms, and commanded respect from world leaders, but this tiny person had already claimed his heart completely. "She's got your mother's hands," he said softly, touching Hope's perfect fingers, long, graceful. "Your grandmother would have been so proud." Dr. Michael Chen entered quietly, carrying fresh flowers and wearing the gentle smile that had become familiar over the past 3 months. The pediatrician had been recommended by Dr. Foster when Victoria expressed concerns about finding the right doctor for Hope. What began as professional consultations had gradually evolved into something deeper, friendship built on mutual respect and shared values. "How are my favorite patients?" Michael asked, his eyes brightening as he saw the baby. At 38, he'd delivered hundreds of babies, but something about this family's journey to healing resonated with his own experiences overcoming childhood trauma. "Dr. Chen, meet Hope Christina Blackwell," Victoria said, having officially reclaimed her maiden name the week before. "Hope this is the kind man who's going to make sure you stay healthy and strong." Michael approached carefully, understanding the significance of this moment. Over months of appointments and casual conversations, he'd watched Victoria transform from a frightened, broken woman into someone radiant with newfound strength and purpose. "She's absolutely beautiful," he said sincerely. "And that grip she's definitely got her grandfather's determination." Harrison chuckled, remembering how Victoria had clutched his finger with identical intensity 31 years earlier. The Blackwell women have always known what they wanted. Linda Martinez, the social worker assigned to Victoria's case, appeared in the doorway with a clipboard and warm smile. Her presence was routine, documenting that Hope's birth occurred in a safe, stable environment, officially closing the protective services file that had been opened during the domestic violence investigation. "Everything looks perfect here," Linda announced after reviewing the medical charts and observing the family dynamics. "I'll file my final report this afternoon." Hope is being born into exactly the kind of loving, supportive environment every child deserves. As dawn broke over Manhattan, Alina Vasquez arrived with homemade soup and fresh bread, transforming the hospital room into a temporary extension of the Blackwell estate. Her maternal presence had been crucial to Victoria's healing, providing the unconditional support that helped rebuild her confidence as a woman and future mother. "The nursery is ready, Mia," Alina told Victoria as she arranged the food. "Fresh flowers, soft music, and your grandmother's rocking chair by the window. Just like you wanted." Victoria smiled, imagining Hope sleeping peacefully in the sun-drenched room where she herself had spent countless hours as a child. Listening to her grandmother's stories and dreaming of her own future family, Dr. Foster completed her final examination as the morning progressed. "Both mother and baby are thriving. You can go home this afternoon if you feel ready." "More than ready," Victoria replied, eager to begin their new life away from hospitals and courtrooms and the shadows of her past. Thomas Wright arrived at noon with legal documents that officially severed Victoria's last ties to Derek Manning. The divorce had been finalized 3 days earlier, with Derek signing the papers from his federal detention cell rather than face additional charges of contempt. He'd been sentenced to 12 years for fraud, money laundering, and racketeering, with domestic violence charges ensuring he'd serve the full term. He waived all parental rights, Thomas reported matter-of-factly. He'll have no legal connection to Hope whatsoever. When she's old enough to ask, you can tell her that her father chose his own interests over her welfare one final time. Victoria felt only relief. Hope would grow up knowing she was deeply wanted and cherished, surrounded by people who'd chosen to love and protect her. Biology mattered far less than devotion. As they prepared to leave the hospital, Michael appeared with a small, gifted children's book about brave princesses who saved themselves. Inside the cover he'd written, "For Hope may you always know your own strength. With admiration and affection, Dr. Chen." "Would you like to join us for dinner this weekend?" Victoria asked, the invitation carrying implications that extended beyond friendship. "Lena makes the most incredible pagella, and Hope should get to know her pediatrician in a relaxed setting." Michael's smile was answer enough. "I'd be honored." The drive to the Blackwell estate was peaceful, with Hope sleeping contentedly in her car seat while Victoria watched the familiar countryside roll past. Harrison drove carefully, precious cargo, making him more cautious than usual. "I've been Thinking about the foundation, he said as they turned into the estate's gates. The Christina Blackwell Foundation for Domestic Violence Prevention could fund shelters, legal aid, counseling, services, everything you needed but had to fight to find. Victoria considered the proposal, already envisioning how her experience could help other women escape situations like hers. Hope could grow up knowing her mother turned survival into service. I like that legacy. At the mansion, Hope's homecoming was celebration and sanctuary combined. Alina had prepared a feast. Dr. Foster stayed for dinner to ensure the transition went smoothly, and Michael lingered on the terrace after others retired, talking with Victoria about books and dreams and the possibility of building something beautiful from broken pieces. As midnight approached, Victoria sat in her grandmother's rocking chair, nursing Hope while gazing out at the moonlit lake. 6 months ago, she'd been trapped in a marriage built on lies, fear, and control. Tonight, she held her daughter in a house filled with love, surrounded by people who'd chosen to stand beside her through darkness toward light. Harrison appeared in the doorway, carrying 2 cups of chamomile tea. "How are you feeling?" "Complete," Victoria replied honestly. "For the first time in years, I feel like myself again. Strong, purposeful, ready for whatever comes next." Hope stirred in her arms, opening dark eyes that seemed to take in everything: the warm room, the devoted faces, the sense of absolute safety that would be her birthright. "She'll never know what it feels like to be afraid in her own home," Victoria whispered. "She'll grow up believing that love means protection, not possession. That's the gift we're giving her." Harrison kissed his daughter's forehead, then his granddaughter's. "The Blackwell women have always been fighters. Hope's just beginning her story, but she's already surrounded by people who'll make sure it's a good one." Outside, snow began to fall, blanketing the estate in pristine white. Inside, 3 generations of Blackwell women slept peacefully, grandmother's spirit watching over a daughter who'd found her strength and a granddaughter who'd inherit a legacy of resilience, love, and the unshakable knowledge that she was cherished beyond measure. Derek Manning's reign of terror had ended in a federal prison cell, but Hope Christina Blackwell's story was just beginning. It's written in laughter and lifted in loving arms, surrounded by the promise that some battles are worth fighting, some stands are worth taking, and some love is strong enough to heal even the deepest wounds. The future stretched ahead, bright with possibility.